Good evening. Welcome to Public Affairs Public Access, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of the Houston area and Houston Media Source. My name is Jeff Reichman, and I am very excited with who we have on the show today. We are talking to 4 of our League of Women Voters rising stars of our latest class. They're all extraordinarily impressive, and we're going to get to know them a little bit more throughout the show today. This hour is going to go by very quick. We have a phone number that you can call in that will appear on the screen below. So please feel free to call in and ask questions. Each of our rising stars is extremely different, but they all share one thing in common, and you'll start to see that throughout the conversation here today. So beginning to my left, why don't we introduce ourselves, and then I'll start to ask you some questions.
Sounds good, great. I'm Tico Reynolds-Hausman, and I'm president of TKO Biz Solutions. We're a small local firm, and we help small women minority businesses complete the diversity certification for government contracting opportunities. And I'm excited to be one of the rising stars this year. And I am also incoming PTA president for my daughter's middle school, so I'm pretty excited about that and looking forward to learning more about the process and how government works.
Congratulations, that's excellent. Sabia?
Hi there, I'm Sabia Gire. I work at Outreach Strategist. We're a small public affairs firm here in Houston. I work on campaign strategy primarily, so I help clients kind of figure out where they are in the process and how we're going to proceed. So we work on political campaigns, but also corporate and nonprofit campaigns. I'm also really excited to be here at the League of Women Voters and looking forward to some of the stuff we'll be able to do.
Awesome. Welcome. Phil?
Hi, Jeff. Philip Yates. I'm an attorney here in Houston, Texas. I work at the Houston Area Urban League. I work in advocacy, public policy, and I do a lot of their outreach initiatives as well as some of their economic development programming there at the Houston Area Urban League. I'm very excited to be a part of this League of Women Voters Rising Stars class, and I'm hoping to learn more and with these leaders and grow with them as well.
Awesome. Blair?
I'm Blair Parker, and I am also an attorney. I've been an attorney for about 6 years now. I work for a firm called Scott M. Brown & Associates, and we specialize in family law, litigation, and criminal law. I love what I do, and I hope to grow with the league and learn a lot from them and my other fellow rising stars, so I'm also excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, I have some individual questions for each of you based on reading your Rising Stars applications. I wasn't part of the judging committee, but I got to look at all of the applications afterwards, and it's really impressive. So I know a little bit about some of your backgrounds, and I'd like to ask you some questions about them. Starting with you, Blair, you mentioned that you're a family law attorney, and something that really stood out to me in your application is you talked about how education comes from being exposed to people from different walks of life. Can you elaborate a little bit more about that and what education and education policy means to you?
Yes, absolutely. Education is extremely important to me. I think that it's, information is extremely powerful. I think that education is of pivotal importance no matter what age you are. Especially for what I do, people come into my office, because they're in the worst times of their lives, they're seeking help. And a lot of the times, they're seeking my knowledge on this particular specific subject because that's what I specialize in. Whereas like in real world application, in a non-professional setting, I think that education with regards to public education and, higher education, getting as much access to the public as possible is very important to me, because there are things that I think that we take for granted as educated people, as we all are sitting at this table, that not everybody has access to. Things that we think are common knowledge are not necessarily common knowledge to other people. And I think it's important to make sure that everybody has access to as much knowledge as possible, because that leads to informed voting, informed life decisions, things like that. And I think that in order to make sure that we're getting those people that access, that you have to be exposed to people who, like I said, don't necessarily have access to that information like the rest of us might have throughout our lives.
That's excellent. That's really interesting. Philip, something that stood out to me in your application is this quote, economic development is the new civil rights movement. You, in your work, live that every day. Can you explain more and maybe unpack that a little more for us?
Absolutely. As you mentioned, I've been doing economic development for probably throughout my whole adulthood. Professionally, for the last 6 years, I've been doing it for the Houston Area Urban League. And I think I was introduced to it as a child being from the African American community, either through personal situations with family members or community members. You're predisposed to certain inequities and disparities in the community. And automatically I became sensitive, and then having the parents that I do have, automatically they were advocates based on their professional field, so I kind of evolved into that role through them, and then through exposure, through different internships, through jobs, I ended up at the Urban League. And then Urban League has given me firsthand visibility in terms of some of the ills that go into the community in terms of people not having, I guess you look at the unemployment rate, and then if you look at a certain community, maybe from an underserved community, a community living under the poverty level, then they're affected deeper or harsher. And then they don't have the same opportunities that I had, where they were able to go to college, or they had two parents in the household, or they had second chances. And so all that kind of evolved into me into a passion where I feel like we have a duty now to make sure that everybody has an equal right, not just based on the fact that you were born to a certain family or that you live in a certain zip code. Because I guess looking at myself personally and then the work we do at the Urban League, I feel that's what we do. We look at people. Certain people have certain opportunities based on what they were born with and how they were blessed and things that naturally came to them, but what about those who don't? So I feel like the only way to have fair, equitable solutions is if we provide for those communities. And I feel like that is the new civil rights. Yeah.
That's excellent. Yeah. That's excellent. Sabia, through your work, you've worked on a lot of really interesting, high-profile campaigns, but it was a class in college that got you informed about human trafficking, and now you live in a city which is considered a hub of human trafficking. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that experience of learning more about this and how you apply that learning today.
Sure. So when I was in college, like you said, I took a class on human trafficking and found out like some of the ways to spot someone that's being human trafficked, and that people are all around us. And then moving back from Austin to Houston, I learned Houston is really a place where a lot of people are human trafficked, and that just tore me up. So I started working with a nonprofit here in Houston called The Landing, and they are based in the southwest part of Houston. So that's where a lot of people get human trafficked, and they work with victims that are on the street. They just provide them services that they need. It's a drop-in center, so if they need to just get off the street in this Houston heat and get some water or food, they help them out. And so I'm really excited to be working with them and just trying to resolve this issue as a city. I think as large as we are, we've got the resources and we've got the desire and passion for people to help fix this issue.
That's awesome. That's really great. And Tico, something that stood out for me in your application was fair and equitable funding for all Texas children.
Yeah.
And as an incoming PTA president, you have the ability to kind of make that happen at the school level. Can you talk to me a little bit more about your interest in that and how you see your leadership applying to that?
Okay. Well, it's interesting. Both of my kids went to and still do go to what's considered really good schools in HISD. We're in the Houston Heights area, so not only we're zoned to a couple of the best schools there. And when my daughter went into middle school, I decided that I wanted her to get outside of that, and she went to Baylor College of Medicine at Ryan, which is a STEM-driven program, but it's outside of the district and a relatively new school. And so, midway during the school year, we would get notices about, things that teachers and supplies that seemed like, you should have in school. And so consequently, she ended up back at our local school, but nonetheless, I got to see firsthand the inequity in school. If you have, for example, a trustee who's not as engaged in your school as those who are, and even started to learn a little bit more about, you know, I think they call them PUs, but how much you get per student. And it just seems that most of those larger dollars go to the magnet programs, which happen to not be in our underserved areas of town. And so that's when I really started to feel the inequity. And you know, I really started to engage during the recapture issue as I began to learn about more. And I discovered that there was a thirst for knowledge. I out of a sudden was the, you know, school representative. It's like, well, what do you think about that? And so I just realized people care and they have a passion and they want to organize. And I just thought, well, if not me, who? And so just based on, you know, the passion, wanting to really focus at this particular time on issues, not people, you know, things that we all can agree on and see if we can move the needle there. And after going to the state legislative session this April, I realized that, you know, obviously there's more work to be done. And so I'm very passionate about keeping the heat on, for lack of a better word, and talking to our senators and our local leaders now so that they know that this is a priority. So, you know, maybe we can begin to try to, you know, create equal situations in school.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. So I'd like to start the next question with you as well.
Sure.
And this is a question for all of you, and you can answer in whatever order strikes you. But this is a question we've been trying to figure out, and that's, what does the future of the League look like to you? And that can be the League of Women Voters of the Houston area, that can be the National League, but the real question is what is the role of nonpartisan voter education and voter turnout? And what does that look like in an era of fake news? What does that look like in an era of, you know, voter ID laws and all of the different things that we face?
So, gosh, where do we start?
It's a big question.
Yeah.
I don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Can you repeat the first part of
Sure.
that?
What does the future of the League of Women Voters look like to
Okay.
you?
So I'm very excited about the future. You know, I see a lot of passion. I see a lot of people wanting to be engaged. And with Houston being as diverse as it is, I think we have an incredible opportunity to really be looked at as a pretty progressive, you know, city. I'm excited that Harris County went blue. I think that's extremely promising. And I think the future will lie in each of us, you know, having different ethnicities, different experiences. And I think people just really underestimate how diverse and forward-thinking most, you know, Houstonians are. We are not all, you know, uneducated and, you know, I'll leave it there. I'm gonna put a pin in it right there.
Fair enough.
Well, that was the number one question I used to get when I went to college out of state was, oh, you're from Texas. Where's your accent?
And your horse.
I grew up in the city.
And your
Did you go to
horse.
school on a
Yeah.
horse? I'm
Yeah.
like, no.
Yeah.
But
I think the world is, the nation is starting to see that. I feel excited that, you know, we're gonna continue to be the place to be.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
oh, and something else that kind of spoke to me in your question was like, you know, the League of Women Voters is obviously nonpartisan, and I think that nonpartisan, there's a time and a place for partisanship, but I don't, you know, for me the question has always been, why is healthcare for American citizens a partisan issue? Why is women's access to reproductive health a partisan issue? These are human issues, and I think it's very important to, you know, for the parties especially, to realize this and try to work together, because I think that's been the problem for the last, I don't know, 8 to 12 years. I mean, where the partisanship has just gotten so extreme that they can't, the towing the party line has become the number one, priority for the people currently in office. Most of them, not all of them, but I mean, and that's a big problem for regular Joe Schmo like me, because, I don't understand why my access to healthcare is going to depend on what side of the aisle you're on. I think everybody should have equal access to, all of the services of government, all of anything with healthcare, education, like she was saying earlier. I mean, it doesn't make sense to me why all of these issues have become partisan. The parties have to work together in order to reach, best case scenario solution. Otherwise, they're never going to get anything done as usual. So.
That's true.
Just to draw on some of the things you brought up, I think the league could really work with, my hope for the league, especially in Houston, is that we start working with communities that aren't quite as involved in politics. So getting people excited and making politics relatable. It doesn't do much for us to tout out a politician who they don't really connect with. But if we do talk about education and healthcare and how these things impact people's lives and how their small vote or voice being spoken is going to make all the difference, I really think there's power in numbers, and I would really like for the league to start branching out and working with the community at large.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, and Sabia brings up a good point in terms of messaging and making sure that you reach some of those communities that don't traditionally vote. And I think that starts with understanding some of the limitations that our population has. I think when you look at this round table, I know we all have different backgrounds, different strengths, of course our own weaknesses, but we're the minority in terms of people who are engaged and have understand the civic duty and responsibility. So we want to be at the table. We're going to vote regardless because of our own personal stories and our passions. But when we start having a discussion in terms of civic engagement and involvement and what it's going to look like in the future, I think we have to take all of our collective thoughts and think about the regular Joe and what's he going through every day. So, for example, I live in a condo downtown. I've lived there for the past 6 years. We have an HOA. I get a notice on the elevator every other Tuesday regarding a board meeting. I get on the elevator, I look at the notice, I get in my car, I go to work. And I do whatever the Urban League tells me to do or whatever the law firm tells me to do, and I come home and the notice is taken down. And I've been doing this repeatedly for 6 years. Not once have I thought about going there and thought about all the changes. And it's okay to me because when I see the lobby, they put new furniture in. I see they make upgrades to the parking lot or the pool. And so in my mind, everything is going okay. And they'll even send me a financial report. And I think that's what the regular Joe, how they look at democracy and they look at civic engagement. Everything is going to be okay. I have more responsibility. I have a family. I have kids. I have a wife. I have to have a living I have to make. And I think the league and other people who are interested in advocacy and in building a stronger civic population, I think we have to start looking at those limitations and not being so optimistic and saying, how do we get those people involved? How do we change the messaging so that it's in some of those micro communities? And to the other point, I think, and then leveraging some of those tools also to bring them in so that they understand the process and have ownership and equity and then have access. So there's like technology. And right now, technology is twofold. One, you have to look at social media. And I think social media does a lot of positive because it gets the conversation going. But if you don't have people like you guys at the table helping out with that conversation, or the League of Women Voters are not at the forefront of those micro communities, well, you have a lot of, misguided information, or some people may say fake news. And then it's like-minded people just liking it. And then that becomes the contribution to democracy that you got to like versus really participating in government. So on the other hand, and you look at technology and League of Women Voters go on there, I think the other hand, if you look at like SB 5 that just got voted on, and then it kind of helped out with the 2011 Teen Voter ID laws, I think technology can play a role. Now you can say, okay, you got everything you want. You have voter IDs, and you have other ways to identify yourself at the polls, and we're saying we have every way that we can alleviate fraud. Why not do online voting? Why not make it so that these people who are too busy to participate in the process have another way or another avenue to participate? So I think the League of Women Voters, because they're nonpartisan, and because they let people like myself and you and you and you at a seat at the table who may not want to have our names on the ballot or other ways of being involved in the process, I think we can create innovative and creative ways to bring some of those other people along and make sure they're, we grow our body of intelligent voters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I told you before, all of you, that I was going to ask you this question, but I want to amend it a little bit. I was going to say name a local politician that you admire and why, but I want to change that. I'd like to know a local leader that you admire and why, and broaden it out a little bit. And it can be a politician. I don't mean to put you all on the spot, but I think that it's really important for young leaders in the community, and I'm being generous by throwing myself into that young section, have mentors, and maybe not necessarily mentors who take them out to coffee and tell them what to do, but who lead by example, people that you admire and that you look to model your own leadership style after. Is there anybody that comes to mind? And we don't have to go in any particular order here.
I'll go first.
Sure, please.
I have to say my dad, Kerry Yates. And the reason I say that is because, one, when I think of leadership, I think of somebody who has passion and they do it effortlessly. And I know we all have our own agenda and we have things we have to accomplish in order to put food on the table or to meet certain goals. But when I look at him, growing up, I looked at him just dad, and I didn't know what he was doing in the community. And it wasn't until my mid-20s when I got involved with the Urban League and law and other affiliated, service-oriented groups. That's when I really started understanding the respect he had in different pockets of the community. And no matter their skin, the color of their skin, how much money they made, how high they were on the totem pole, what elected official, to somebody who may be unemployed or just in transition. And through their life, he garners that respect because he has a passion for service. And that introduced me to wanting to be involved in advocacy and civic engagement. And I think that's what it's about. It's about being somebody who just really cares about the community, and you're doing whatever you can to get involved, not necessarily have an agenda. So that would be the person for me.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, it would probably be leader, non-politician, my friend from high school, known her since I was in second grade. Her name's Sarah Slayman. She's very active in campaigning. She just finished up campaigning for the mayoral candidate in Pearland and one for, she worked on the Bernie campaign. I follow her religiously because she's just so inspiring. I mean, she dedicated her life to doing this. She kind of inspired me to get more involved, even with my limited schedule. And so she's definitely an inspiration to me and to a lot of other people. And I encourage everybody to seek her out if you ever need any help with anything regarding campaigning or anything. She's fantastic. The politician, if you could even really call her that, the Sherry Dean is a judge in Harris County. I love her. She's fantastic. I don't think enough importance is placed on judicial elections because I don't think people understand how much judges can affect people's lives on a daily basis. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people on a daily basis, whether it's criminal or civil or family. And she has mentored me. She was always a very fair judge. I've had jury trials in front of her, bench trials. She's been a fantastic judge. There are other Harris County judges who I also love, but Sherry's just been fantastic, and she's an example of what I think a judge should be, which is fair. You follow the law, you're not biased, you're not towing party lines, and she's just been a really big mentor for me.
That's awesome.
I'll go. So as far as a leader, I really admire a good friend of mine. Her name is Carla Lane, and she has a staffing company. She is inspirational. She graduated college, went to work for an accounting firm, decided she wanted to buy that business, so she worked in it, knew the business, bought the business, and so now she is, I would probably say national, I know at a minimum regional, but one of the kindest women that I know with her time, with her money. She started a nonprofit, but she just, when you look at someone who walks with grace and who remains humble. I really respect that in her. And I'd have to say for local politician, I really do like Amanda Edwards, because she's another person who just handles herself with such grace and dignity, and and she lights up a room, and people enjoy her, and she's fair, and so I think I tend to gravitate to probably strong women leaders who not only walk the walk, but talk the talk, but walk the walk as well. As far as career and giving back to the communities that we live in.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I am going to say my boss, Mustafa Tamiz. I've worked with him now for 3 years, and he really has helped me to hone my skills, and he's a mentor that I can always have on hand, which is very nice. He helps anyone that comes through the office and needs career advice or advice on whether they should run for office or a plethora of things, and so he is a really great leader in the community, and I really look up to him. For a politician, I would go with Wendy Davis. It was one of the first campaigns that I worked on when she was running for governor, and when she was fighting against SB2, she really, I think, put women's health at the forefront, and specifically that bill really ignited, I think, a whole lot of women in Texas, and so I really admired her standing up and filibustering for that.
That's awesome.
Jeff, I forgot to give a shout out to my politician. That
Please, go ahead.
I would hate to, I would be remiss. Commissioner Ellis.
Sure.
And I do want to just, because I think he's similar to my dad, Kerry Ace. He does a lot of mentoring. Commissioner Ellis does the same thing through his Texas Legislative Internship Program, which, as you know, I was able to work with Speaker Joe Strauss for a session, and that was in my opinion, that was my true first exposure to how it all works, the process, and being able to participate in hearings and understanding how the bills are moved and negotiated and so on and so forth. But I think he provides a lot of opportunities for people like ourselves, rising stars. He lays that pathway, he mentors you, and then he positions you if you truly want to be a civic leader. Mm-hmm. And so I think he's also somebody who should be mentioned among the other great leaders that we talked about.
That's excellent. Yeah, Commissioner Ellis is fantastic. And I'm glad you brought up your experience with Speaker Strauss because he is in the news recently as the governor calls a special session. And it brings to mind the role of the league again in being nonpartisan and representing facts and trying to take the politics out of it and educate people as much as possible. I want to put a spin on what the future of the league looks like in a different form, and that is, what can we do as members of the league to help tamper down the politics, ramp up the education, and see through the day-to-day fray? I know you work, Speaker Strauss is a Republican House member who is often considered a moderate, voice of moderate Republicans, and he's exceptionally skilled in bipartisan work, as is our Mayor Turner. Mm-hmm. What are things that we can learn from them that we can apply in our future endeavors? And Philip, why don't we start with you, because your experience is...
I think you guys use me as the guinea pig. I go first, and he fumbled the ball. This is how you scored a touchdown. Good question. And because that was the first thing Commissioner Ellis told us. He said, put your politics to the side. Mm-hmm. And he said, and he looked at me because of who I was working for and the influence that he had. But it was easy because I learned just what you're saying in that policy office, that everybody in that office had a different agenda. And like when I was working for criminal jurisprudence, and I don't mind bringing this person up because they're doing great work in criminal jurisprudence, but Shakara Pumphrey, man, throughout the whole session, I never knew her politics. And I wondered, I said, okay, she was African-American, she was a female, and then we were meeting with certain people with issues that may go against a community of color. And I said, are we really going to allow this to happen? I'm thinking in my head. But then I'm also thinking about the responsibility that Speaker Strauss has as somebody who has to work across both party lines. Although he's allegiant to the Republican Party, he's also understands he has to negotiate and control the House and govern the House accordingly. Mm-hmm. And so I took that, I learned watching him, his staff, that you have to listen to both sides. And then in order to really, truly get things done, you need both sides to participate because there is a trade-off. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of times the basic everyday Joe, as Blair put it, and myself who's going past the HOA meeting and not voting, But when I get upset, I want to put something on Facebook that, why didn't this happen? Or I need this. Well, you don't understand that sometimes when a politician, whether it's the blue guy or the red guy, made that decision or he voted, something else is bartered or traded on the back end. And so I think as the League of Women Voters, or even at the Urban League or any of our other places are of disposition, we do have a duty to look at it from a nonpartisan standpoint and be able to articulate the policy, how it affects the budget, and how it affects all communities. And negatively, there may be some negative consequences, but there's also some positive consequences. But being able to tell the whole story without, I guess, without being partisan, I guess, probably just being frank with it. And so that is our duty. And I think you learn that in the Speaker's House because meaning the House of Representatives under the Speaker, because he is a moderate. I don't believe that we have such a moderate inside the other chamber. But that's okay. And I think that's why it is important that all of us as leaders on the ground or grassroots level, that if we're in a position of power our duty is to mobilize people on a grassroots level, that we keep that in mind as we communicate, even with somebody who you know may have similar politics as you, just understand how it affects the grand scheme of things when we're trying to be progressive and move Texas forward as a unit.
Yeah.
And I think to continue to diversify, because it's kind of like you mentioned, being able to be relatable. So the diversity is very important if I'm going into the African American community where there's already a lack of distrust against certain candidates. So being able to, to validate that or provide, education. And honestly, that was one of the things that really drew me to the League, was the nonpartisanship of it. And I know a lot of people, I think it's a great opportunity to pull in all kind of different walks of people, because people want to do something, but they want to do something that's gonna, hopefully move the needle a little bit. And at that point, I truly believe those are those issues that we can agree on. And I also think that continue to educate on local and non-national opportunities. I'm of the mind that what happens locally affects us more faster than any national thing could do, and then it becomes relative, all the way down to serving in your kid's PTA or going to, just being an educational tool to let people know the things that they can do to affect change. I know even down to writing letters and making calls, right? So people want to get involved, and so to continue to find ways to relate and to not make it seem that, well, you have to be educated if you want to know. To really make it relatable. It just chaps my hide when people say it's complicated. I'm like, well, explain it to me, because I need to know. And so I think to continue to uncomplicate and just stay nonpartisan. I think that's where we are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say to keep the conversation going.
Yeah.
And so it's one thing to come in right at the end and say, hey, there's an election going on, vote for the next 2 weeks. But it's another thing to have started that conversation, 2 years in advance or a year in advance on issues that are really important, so that people can have a say in what they think should happen before it comes time to vote on it, and really take the time to understand the issue and how it relates to them.
That's excellent, yeah.
Yeah, and just to add on to what the three of you kind of already said, but from an attorney perspective, I argue with people every day, and so I think it's important, though, to and almost pivotal when you have a position or you're making an argument, that you remain open, to your opponent, for lack of better words, position, because if you don't, then you'll never be able to empathize with them. You'll never be able to see it from their position. And you open yourself up to either having your position changed or strengthening your position, because you understand where they're coming from and you can reach a better solution that might make everybody happy. And I think that that's one of the things that I wish politicians would grasp more soundly, I guess, is that, you're never going to make everybody happy. Right. The point is that you all are there to work together to figure out what the best solution for all of us as the greater good are, not just your constituents, so that you can guarantee that you're going to be put back into office come the next election cycle. And because it's not your job as a politician to cater to your constituents, it's your job to help your constituents understand why you're making the decisions that you're making as a politician for the greater good of all of the people that you represent, not just the people that you know are like your wheelhouse base. So, I mean, I think that that's extremely important. I think, as Sabia said, that outreach is very important. Keeping the conversation going is very important because, as I stated earlier, exposing yourself to people from different walks of life is incredibly important because, unfortunately, we're Americans, and it's hard for us to care about things that don't affect us directly. So when you see how some of these laws or policies or whatever that is going on in local or national politics is actually affecting other people, I mean, it's kind of hard as a human being not to empathize with those people's positions. Like cutting Medicaid could ruin a lot of people's lives. Taking away access to reproductive health can, really hurt a lot of people or cause people a lot of pain and can have an overarching effect on our economy. I mean, there's just a lot of things that, as Philip put it, people like us who may have been blessed or born into privilege or something like that, we have to go out of our way to see what these other people are experiencing, and I think that that's important, and I think that the outreach and making sure that you continuously inform people and expose them to the realities of how this law is going to affect maybe not you but other people is very, very important.
Please.
No, I like what Blair just said there. The cultural awareness, and because you were talking about Speaker Strauss, and I'm not going back to him, but he took a stance on the bathroom issue on a state level, and I think on any of those policies that we have coming from a state or local level or even a federal level, there needs to be cultural awareness and understand, again, going back to just the everyday person, what they're going through and how that may be communicated to them, whether it's immigration law, whether it's economic policy, education policy, or so on and so forth. And I think that's a charge that we have as the league because we are nonpartisan. It's like we can't just communicate as if everybody is smart as Blair. Or everybody may be in as tune as Philip or Sabia or Tico, and of course, the great Jeff. And I think once we start having that conversation, so how would it come across to this community who may be a first generation XYZ or may not have this education or may be in transition and so on and so forth. I think that really helps out and that improves our voter base and our communities as a whole.
Absolutely.
So,
what keeps going through my mind when I think about what y'all are saying about the future of the league, constant communication, ongoing education, is that the League of Women Voters is a lot like eating your vegetables. Whereas fake news or politics or highly partisan articles is kind of like sugary snacks. It tells you the things on both sides, what you want to see happen. Sure. If you want Trump to be right, you can get news that Trump's right. If you want Trump to be wrong, you can get news for that too. But understanding the nuance and understanding the truth is a lot harder to do. And that's even more challenging to create an ongoing dialogue around the truth and to say, hey, you need to avoid the sugar because the vegetables is what makes you live a long and healthy life.
Right.
What are some of the ways in which the league can do that? Tico, you were talking about making it relatable. Maybe you can go a little further. Are there any examples of other areas that are conveying factual information in a nonpartisan way that's particularly effective? I don't mean to put you on the spot with the example.
No. But actually, it keeps, I guess, because that's the world I live in between the two kids is the school system.
Yeah.
But I don't know why we don't have civics anymore. So maybe there's some kind of, civic outreach where League of Women Voters can go into schools and, I don't want to say put on a play, but, just talk about, what the different role, down to the simplistic, these are the three branches and this is what they can do and this is what they cannot do. I think that's probably the most shocking thing is how civically ignorant we are as a country, unfortunately, I think that's definitely one.
Well, to kind of add on
way.
what Philip said is, and to tie into kind of what you said, it's, we need to get people more interested in government and how it functions, and like she said, civics. I think that that's important because, as he stated, you just kind of kick back and things are working for you. You know, his condo people are taking care of him, so he doesn't worry about it. You know, and when you're going through your daily life, and you know the wheels of government are turning and it's not affecting you on the daily, then it's hard for you to really care, for lack of a better word. And so I think it's important, like I said, to make sure that, just like Tico said, is that like we get people more engaged and interested in government. I mean, that's part of why, as I touched my mic when he told me not to, it's part of why I became an attorney, because I was just fascinated with how the government worked. I was fascinated as to how, you know, all three branches interact with each other and how they can all affect each other and keep each other in check, and how, you know, even the small people like me as an attorney, you know, can affect that. And, you know, I think that it's important if people can see how insanely complicated our government actually is and how it can affect you on a macro and micro level, then I think that people will hopefully want to be more engaged and more informed in that process.
I keep thinking about this as we speak. There's a newsletter that I get every morning, and so it's aimed at, I would say, the millennial crowd. And it's written in very easily understood language. They throw in some like hip catchphrases. It makes it fun to read, and it also keeps you on top of the news. And so if the league were to do something like that with local issues specifically for Houston, I think that would be a really interesting thing for people who want to stay on top of local news sources and what's going on in a very unbiased way.
That's a great idea.
And that's interesting you say that, because my daughter's 13. She will not watch the news, but she'll watch Vice News. Which is actually very short, like everything's like, you know,
Yeah.
it's the way they like it. Give it to me quick. Give what's next, you know. They're jamming 10 stories in 20 minutes, you know.
Yeah.
But she watches news, and consequently she's getting world news. So
It's a great channel.
you know. Yeah.
So is it something where you need constant contact with little bite-sized pieces
I think
throughout
so.
the day?
I
I feel
think
like
so.
we're watching history unfold. We're always watching history unfold, but certainly this year we've watched historic movement of our country in a different direction.
Yeah.
And we see like steering a battleship, and it starts to groan and creak and moan. Like we're feeling that right now. And I thought that perhaps it would cause people to be a little bit more engaged in the day-to-day, and it has, for sure, but certainly not as much as I would think. And so that's kind of the root of that question is, sure, we need people to engage more every day, but
How?
you know, how can we step that up a little bit so that we can get to that complicated conversation?
And I think, you know, you asked me in my original question when I put the vision of 2024 regarding economic mobility. And I think that's a part of the solution as well, empowering people and giving them ownership and equity. And I know Blair liked this in terms of like the John Locke theory and how these natural rights and how that helped the government evolve. I think that's something we're born with. I mean, you want ownership, and then what you have ownership of, you try to protect. A lot of disenfranchised communities don't feel like they have a voice because they feel like they don't own. And maybe that may be an accurate perception because maybe you don't own a home yet. Maybe you don't own a business, or maybe, so on and so forth, wherever that may be, or maybe your voting rights are being challenged, or maybe your citizenship's being challenged, which these are all harsh realities. So I think, and I guess in going to how the civil rights movement has evolved, you can even look at something like the Shelby County ruling, where they struck down like the pre-clearance, and they said because of 4B, it's outdated. It's a reality. It is outdated. Nobody is turning people away because you can't read. It's a different fight, and I think that's how we have to evolve in terms of how the league gets more people engaged. Understand the fight is a little bit different because so many things are moving, and there are different news outlets. There's the good, the bad, and there's Fox, there's MSNBC, and then there's CNN over here. And people
Body
have to,
slammed by the president.
everybody has to pick, what do I choose from, what do I choose from? Well, make them choose themselves. Make them create their own belief system, and then make them believe again in politics. And I think something the league does very well, and along with everybody else here, you're bringing politicians to the forefront and making them explain themselves. So I think if we can do that even better, where it's like you bring the left and the right so that the people at the Urban League only see the left. It's like, no, won't you listen to the right as well so that you can hear the whole story, the whole dialogue, and figure out how it aligns with your belief system so that you can believe again. So I think that's where economic mobility, when you empower people, give them ownership and equity, I think they take ownership and then they'll participate more in politics and democracy.
That's a really good point. Just to move on to the next question, if you could give advice to somebody in Houston who wants to get more involved, and I'm sure you hear from people every day saying, I want to be more involved, what should I do? What's one thing that they should do, whether it's go to a certain event or get involved in a particular organization, aside from, of course, joining the League of Women Voters? What are some of the things that people can do tactically that they can take with them and say, you know what, I'm going to put that on my calendar, I'm going to go do it?
I think I would just, if I had to give anybody advice, it would be definitely just explore your options and just commit. I mean, because there are a lot of options out there. You don't have to be like on the front lines, like committing 10, 20 hours of your week, you know, when you have a full-time job to civic engagement. I mean, it can be, you know, as little as donations or taking one day out of your weekend to do like a little phone banking. I mean, it doesn't have to be world-shattering volunteer work. I mean, just getting involved, every little bit helps, especially in local politics and grassroots campaigning. I mean, I think that, you know, they're never going to turn, you know, volunteers away. So, I mean, whatever time you have or want to devote, I mean, there's going to be somewhere where you can devote it to. I mean, the simplest thing you can do is to vote. That's the easiest thing you can do to take part in civic engagement. I mean, and so I think making sure that people understand that it's really that simple and that there are a lot of options out there for you to volunteer is very important. And just make sure that if you're really committed to wanting to volunteer, then trust me, there are opportunities out there. You just got to find them, and social media is a big hub for a lot of different things. She mentioned she gets a little newsletter. I also get one, and I like the one that I get because it gives me those options. There's like a section that says, hey, we're having a mixer on this bill that's coming out, and then there's one saying, hey, we need volunteers for this, and then there's a section saying like that we need help on a campaign here. I mean, it's like they give you options in this newsletter on ways that you can volunteer, and then you can figure out, you know, how to devote your time accordingly.
Okay.
So.
Oh, sure. Well, I think that's great, but you know, I think it's going to require figuring out what you're passionate about, because it takes outside time. So if you're not passionate for it, you're not going to take that extra time in the morning or whatever time that you're giving to do that. And once you figure out what that is, I say be consistent. You know, one of my goals for this year is, you know, I was fired up, I was here, I was there, I was here, I was there, let's go, let's go. And so, you know, there are now 2 specific organizations where that's where I'm going to channel my time. And so I think sometimes because that consistency can fall to the wayside when you're trying to do too many things. So just figure out what you're passionate about. And like you said, you can call people if you don't want to. You can send emails. I'll bring it back to just pay your PTA dues and go to those, you know. But there's, you know, just figure out what your comfort level is. And I think that's one of the things that's definitely come out of this whole cycle is people showing other people this is how you could help, even if it's send us $10 for a roll of stamps. I mean, there's always a way, and you just have to figure out what your comfort level is. Yeah.
So the question is what is one thing that you would recommend somebody to do or get involved in? And I agree that figuring out your passion and figuring out like the range of opportunities that are there are really important. But you all dodged. You dodged it. You didn't get one thing.
I would say it might be hard to find your passion, especially if you've never been involved. So joining an organization like the League of Women Voters or Texas Organizing Project, who consistently fight for local issues, that will help you get your foot in the door and kind of figure out, this is what I like, this is what I don't like. I like knocking on doors. I like making phone calls. I want to be the person that goes to the Capitol and speaks and testifies in front of my legislators. I want to be the person out there protesting on the streets. And so I think joining an organization, if you just Google political organizations in Houston, I think you will be able to find something where you can get your foot in the door and kind of see what you like and feel it out. Because there, like everyone said, there are little things and big things that you can do.
And I doubt I can say anything different than you guys, but I was certainly, and I heard this from another young leader, they said start with what pisses you off.
Yeah.
And once you figure that out, kind of work from there. And I think that involves in figuring out what your why is. There's a speaker, Simon Sinek, he always talks about why, and start with your why and your belief system. And I think once you align your belief system with what pisses you off, you kind of work within small communities. There, like you all said, there's different avenues, whether it's Googling or coming to League of Women Voters. There's the urban leagues, there's TOP. But start from your backyard and go to your HOA meetings. When you see that notice on the elevator, attend the meetings and make a difference.
I just went to my first Civic Club meeting last week. So it was pretty exciting. Yeah. Well, thank you all for joining us today. It's been a wonderful conversation. This is the League of Women Voters 2017 Rising Stars class. This is 1/3 or 1/5 of the class. And I really enjoyed our conversation, so thank you all for your time today. This has been Public Affairs Public Access, brought to you by the League of Women Voters Education Fund and Houston Media Source. And we will see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us.
you.